Chapter 1179. In the past 2 months, too many holy seeds had died at the hands of the holy seed's nemesis. It was said that the strength of the holy seed's holiness was beyond imagination. It had reached a level that was unparalleled in both ancient and modern times. It was a holiness that should not exist in this world. No holy seed could avoid being suppressed by the holy seed's holiness. Once the holy seed's holiness was suppressed, its strength would be greatly affected. The more it was suppressed, the more its strength would be restricted. At their level of cultivation, any loss of strength in a life and death battle would be fatal. Under the suppression of such a powerful divine nature, their strength would fall by 20 to 30%. How could they fight? As such, when they realized that this was a trap, all of the holy seeds began to flee. They all chose to flee in the same direction, the entrance to the blood pool at the top of Jade Pillar Peak. This was the correct choice and also the instinctive choice. The human experts had already surrounded Jade Pillar Peak, and no matter which direction they tried to escape, they would be intercepted. As such, the entrance to the blood pool was their only choice. In an instant, 20 or so figures rushed towards the blood pool. However, as soon as they got close, they saw an extremely shocking scene. A figure suddenly appeared beside the blood pool. His figure was tall and straight, and he stood with his hand on his sword. Although he was alone, he seemed to be able to hold back 10,000 men. "It's him!" Some of the holy seeds cried out, their expressions suddenly panicking. They did not know what Lu Ye's name was. They had always referred to him as the holy seed's nemesis. Of the 20 or so holy seeds, some of them had been hunted down by Lu Yi before, so they naturally knew what he looked like. Even those who had not been hunted down by him had a rough idea of his physique and characteristics, so they all recognized him as soon as they saw him. After a brief moment of panic, an overwhelming number of blood techniques descending upon Lu Yi like a violent storm. Lu Yi had already activated the blood river technique. In an instant, a river of blood so large that all of the holy seeds gasped in amazement appeared. It could no longer be called a river of blood, but rather a sea of blood. The sea of blood surged, concealing Lu Ye's figure. At the same time, under the despairing gazes of all of the holy seeds, it sealed off the entrance to the blood pool. A terrifyingly powerful divine nature filled the air, and all of the holy seeds' faces paled. Hearing about it was one thing, but experiencing it for yourself was another. He had heard about how strong the holy seed's holy attribute was, but if he didn't experience it for himself, he wouldn't be able to understand the huge difference between them. That was a gap that none of the holy seeds dared to imagine. The many blood arts, which had been ferocious when they attacked, were greatly weakened by this holy nature. When they landed in the blood sea, they splashed up waves, but they did not harm Lu Yi at all. On the contrary, under this sudden and huge suppression, some of the holy seeds with weaker holiness lost their balance and fell directly into the blood sea. Most of the holy seeds forcefully stabilized their bodies, but before they could catch their breath, the surging sea of blood rolled back like a blood-colored beast that wanted to devour them all. The holy seeds were in a mess as they tried to dodge, but there were still a few holy seeds that were unable to dodge. They were sucked into the blood sea and disappeared with a splash. The sound of a sword rang out, and the sword chi converged into the shape of a dragon, sweeping over from a certain direction. The experts of Jianghu are coming. Jianghu, a sword cultivator, was always at the forefront. The others followed closely behind. The battle started, and the scene was a mess. However, only the holy seeds who were ambushed were in a mess. The experts of Jianghu were very organized, and they had clearly discussed a countermeasure. At this moment, some of the old seniors were looking for a holy seed, trying their best to pin them down and not giving them a chance to escape. Jianghu and the other sword cultivators led a number of different camps and used their killer moves to surround and kill the holy seeds that were targeted by them. The strategy was very simple, and it was nothing more than dividing a portion of the people to pin down the holy seeds, while the other portion concentrated on killing them. As long as 1 or 2 battles were won, the advantage would snowball. 7. The pattern was expanding. The simple strategy was often the most effective. The holy seeds that were surrounded by many human experts were feeling very uncomfortable at this moment. Even if they tried their best to stay away from the blood sea that Lu Yi used, they could not avoid being affected, and it was difficult for them to use their full strength. 101 Their full strength. Being surrounded and attacked in such a situation, there was no good outcome. In addition, the holy seeds were gathered too close together, and their holiness interfered with each other. The situation was getting worse. In a short while, the holy seeds' cries of surprise rose one after another. The battles in the sky were intense, and Lu Ye's blood sea was not idle either. Although he spread out the blood sea, it was not easy for him to leave the blood pool, so there was not much he could do now, and he could only guard the blood pool and not give the holy seeds a chance to escape. The saint seeds that were trapped by him all realized that the situation was far from good. Without any discussion, they quickly gathered together and charged towards the blood pool. They didn't want to do anything to Lu Yi. What they wanted to do now was to break through Lu Ye's defense and escape from the blood pool. Only then would they have a chance of survival. Their hearts were filled with resentment and grievance. They gathered here because they were guided by the will of heaven and earth, but how could there be a trap for them here? It could not be that the will of heaven and earth of this world had abandoned them. It was completely unreasonable. The holy seeds were all top-notch existences with cultivation at the transcendent realm. Without the suppression of their holiness, Lu Yi would not be able to block any of them in a one-on-one fight, let alone one against many. But under the suppression of his own powerful holiness, the holy seeds in his blood sea could only display a limited amount of strength. Each of them could only display the strength of a 6th or 7th order divine sea cultivator. So even if they had the advantage in numbers and attacked together, Lu Yi could still block them. Under the wave of the mountain coiling blade, no blood race cultivator could get within 10 meters of the blood pool. If they were accidentally cut by the mountain coiling blade, the holy seeds would experience the pain of their souls being cut, and they would scream continuously. Every attack brought despair. After several fruitless attempts, they finally realized that with this human's nemesis guarding the blood pool, even if they doubled their numbers, they would not be able to break through his defense. "Get out!" a holy seed shouted. Continuing to entangle with Lu Yi here was undoubtedly an unwise choice, because the suppression in the blood sea was too great. See, their only choice was to leave the blood sea and look for an opportunity. Although they would inevitably be targeted by the top masters of the human race after leaving the blood sea, the holy seeds would rather face those top masters than confront Lu Yi. Staying here was a dead end, but if they went out and looked for an opportunity, there might be a chance of survival. When the time came, they would scatter and flee, and maybe a few of them would be able to escape. The holy seeds were not fools, but the situation had happened too suddenly, and they were under the suppression of their bloodlines, so their minds were in a mess. Under a loud shout, all of them seemed to wake up from a dream and fled. Lu Yi immediately urged the power of the blood sea to form a binding force on all the holy seeds inside, but there were too many of them. He could only hold back some of them, but not all of them. Suddenly, a scream came from outside, followed by a powerful aura being annihilated. After a long, fierce battle, a holy seed was finally cut down. It was Jianghu who succeeded. At this moment, he had the help of 4 people around him. It was obvious how difficult it was to deal with a holy seed under normal circumstances. Of course, being suppressed by Lu Ye's divine nature was part of the reason. Although the holy seeds outside tried their best to stay away from Lu Ye's blood sea, they still could not completely escape the range of the suppression, which affected the strength he could use. This was undoubtedly a very good start, because Jianghu and the other 4 could free up their hands to help the other groups. As for the holy seeds that escaped from Lu Ye's blood sea, there were others who would take care of them. Everything was going according to plan. In this kind of battlefield, as long as one side suffered losses, the disadvantage would only grow bigger and bigger. But Lu Yi felt that something was wrong, because there was a sudden throbbing in his heart, as if something bad was about to happen. He was in his own blood sea, and did not notice that at this time, the thick dark clouds that covered the blood sea for more than 2 months suddenly dissipated. The sun shone, and the blood sea was bathed in that warm light again. This seemed that in the confrontation between the will of the world, Little Nine had won a complete victory, completely defeating the heavenly might of this world. But no one knew what the truth was. Lu Ye's battlefield imprint sent a message. At this moment he was using all his strength to stimulate the power of the blood sea to bind the holy seeds, but he still hurriedly checked, because something important must have happened to contact him at this time. He thought that some cultivator of the 9 states had contacted him, but who would have thought that little Nine's voice directly sounded in his mind, "Lu Yi, something is wrong." "What do you mean?" "The will of the world of the blood sea has its own spirit. I did not notice it before, or it deliberately hid itself, so I did not notice." "Speak human language." Lu Yi was confused by what he heard. Simply put, the will of the world of this world is not as vague and unclear as we think. It has a certain level of spiritual intelligence. Lu Yi was shocked. In his understanding, it was extremely difficult for the will of the world to give birth to spiritual intelligence. Thinking of how glorious the 9 states was, how deep the foundation of the world was, but even then, the will of the world did not give birth to its own spiritual intelligence. The so-called will of the world was a grand and ethereal existence, the aggregation of all the information in the world. It was basically in a state of ignorance and unconsciousness. It was not an existence that could be touched, but it was everywhere, so it was basically impossible for such an existence to give birth to spiritual intelligence. In the end, little Nine was an exception. Why did the will of the world of the blood sea have spiritual intelligence? If it really had spiritual intelligence, then it could be like little Nine, providing clear help and guidance to the blood race in all aspects, and the blood sea would not have become the current situation under the attack of the cultivators of the 9 states. But since this was little Nine's judgment, it should not be wrong. Please enter .com in your browser to view. Chapter 1180. Also, the feeling it gives me doesn't feel like a pure will of heaven and earth. It feels more like a combination of the will of heaven and earth and some other existence. Little Nine's voice continued. Just like you. Somewhat similar, but not the same. Then what is it? I don't know, and it's already gone. I don't know where it went, but it's most likely where you are. You have to be careful. Lu Yi didn't expect little Nine to be so unreliable, but he also knew that he couldn't blame little Nine for this. Although the will of heaven and earth of the kingdom of the 9 states combined with the weapon spirit was omnipotent in the kingdom of the 9 states, this was the first time it had invaded another world, regardless of whether it was the current era of the 9 states or little Nine. No matter what, the first time was always the first time. Little Nine had already provided the cultivators of the 9 states with the greatest assistance he could. Without him, the cultivators of the 9 states wouldn't have been able to resist the divine punishment of this world. Without him, the cultivators of the 9 states wouldn't have been able to descend from the heavens and wreak havoc in the blood tribe realm. It could be said that little Nine played a major role in the success of this battle, followed by Lu Ye's hard work. Thus, he couldn't ask for too much. However, little Nine always gave Lu Yi the feeling that everything was under his control, making him feel as if he was omnipotent. But in reality, this was a misconception. Little Nine wasn't omnipotent, and there were times when he made mistakes. The kingdom of the 9 states needed to grow, and so did little Nine. Lu Yi knew that he was right. No matter what kind of existence the will of heaven and earth of the blood tribe realm was, since it had left the battlefield with little Nine, it was very likely that it would come here. This was because the battle here would determine the fate of the blood tribe realm. If it wanted to resist, it wouldn't miss out on the battle here. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, Lu Yi was shocked, because he sensed an extremely powerful force emerging from the blood pool beside him, and at the same time, there was also a pressure that made one's heart palpitate. At this time, his sea of blood was spread out above the blood pool as a means to prevent the blood tribe holy seed from escaping into the blood river. Thus, when that inexplicably powerful force burst forth, his sea of blood was the first to bear the brunt of it. This was not a power that could be resisted by human strength. Lu Yi made a prompt decision and withdrew his sea of blood. His figure flickered as he rushed out. The holy seeds that were bound in the blood sea had no idea what was happening. They were struggling to break free from the blood sea, but they were powerless. When Lu Yi put away the blood sea, they immediately regained their freedom. The sudden change made the holy seeds overjoyed. They all rushed toward the entrance of the blood pool. However, just as they rushed to the top of the blood pool, there was a loud boom. Immediately after, the entire jade pillar peak began to shake and tremble. In an instant, blood flew everywhere and the mountain rustled. Lu Yi stood in midair and turned around to look back. His eyes narrowed. The blood in the blood pool gushed out and turned into a continuous river of blood. Before the few holy seeds of the blood kindred that had just broken free and were about to charge and could react, they were enveloped by the river of blood and disappeared in an instant. The river of blood that rushed out of the blood pool was continuous. As if it had a mind of its own, it was like a long dragon that shook its head and wagged its tail as it rushed toward the nearest battlefield. Over there, two figures were entangled. They were the top powerhouses of the human race who were entangled with a holy seed of the blood kindred. The blood-red dragon rushed over. Seeing that the situation was not good, the powerhouses of the human race immediately dodged. The holy seed of the blood kindred also wanted to dodge, but the blood-red dragon was obviously aimed at him. For a moment, he could not dodge and suffered the same fate as the other holy seeds that were caught in it. His figure was enveloped by the river of blood and disappeared without a trace. Lu Yi looked at this scene with his mouth agape. Many thoughts surged in his mind, but he could not figure out what had happened. Today's battle was a trap set by the cultivators of the 9 states against the holy seeds of the blood kindred. Everything was going according to plan. As long as there was enough time, the holy seeds that came here would definitely be killed. By then, the blood refinement realm would be completely pacified. However, this trap was not set up by the cultivators of the 9 states. Instead, it was set up by borrowing the power of the will of heaven and earth of the blood refinement realm. If Little Jio's judgment was correct, then the will of heaven and earth of this realm had a certain level of intelligence. It should not have directed those holy seeds to gather here. The human race had the chance to catch them all in one fell swoop. However, it had done so. What was happening now was even more incomprehensible. Just as Lu Yi was thinking, he suddenly had a faint feeling in his heart. After carefully comprehending it, Lu Yi was shocked. Because if he had followed this feeling, then he should have taken the initiative to go forward and merge with the blood-red dragon that surged out of the blood pool to strengthen the power of the blood-red dragon. Lu Yi quickly understood that this feeling was a call to the holy seed. In other words, all existences with holy seed could sense this call, and it was an irresistible call. The reason he could resist it was entirely because when refining the holy blood, the talent tree burned away the things that were harmful to him, allowing him to maintain his human form. However, the holy seeds of the blood race did not have this ability. Lu Yi looked up and saw that those holy seeds of the blood race that were originally fighting with the human race experts were all fearlessly rushing toward the direction of the blood-red dragon. They did not care about the injuries their opponents would cause them, even if it meant losing an arm or a leg. In an instant, streaks of blood-red light all gathered in one direction. Lu Yi knew something was wrong and quickly sent a message to his second senior sister. His second senior sister replied very quickly, and the result was just as he had guessed. Lan Qiue, who had been moving with his second senior sister and the others, was indeed affected. Just before Lu Yi sent the message, she flew out without any warning. Looking at the direction, she was flying toward Jade Pillar Peak. However, because his second senior sister and the others were very far from here, even with Lan Qiue's speed, it would take a few days to reach here. The few days? No matter who won or lost the battle here, it would be over. Therefore, Lan Qiue did not have to worry about anything. It was his side that should be worried. As the holy seeds left the battlefield and merged with the blood-red dragon, Lu Yi clearly felt an extremely powerful holy seed. 201 holy seed, and the holy seed was still increasing rapidly. Not only that, Lu Yi also saw droplets of golden light drifting in the blood-red dragon. That was clearly the holy blood that had not been refined, and it was rushing out with the surging blood. The blood in the blood pool did not stop rushing out, as if it wanted to drain all the blood in the underground blood river. As the blood poured in and merged with the holy seeds, the size of the blood-red dragon also expanded fiercely. Many of the human tribe's experts attacked it, but it was to no avail. Meng Jie flashed to Lu Ye's side and asked, "What's going on?" No one knew more about the blood tribe than Lu Yi. After all, strictly speaking, he was also a holy seed. That was why Meng Jie ran over to ask him. Lu Yi did not know and could only shake his head. The blood pool finally stopped gushing out. At this moment, on top of the Jade Pillar Peak, a huge blood-red dragon was coiled up. Over 100 human warriors gathered in all directions, using various methods to bombard the blood-red dragon. Although they didn't know what had happened, no matter what, they had to attack first. As for whether it was effective or not, no one knew. In the chaos of spiritual power, the blood-red dragon did not show any signs of counterattack. But the more it did so, the more uneasy it made people feel. Until a certain moment, it suddenly gathered in the middle and turned into a strange shape. It was a huge egg-shaped object. It looked like an egg, but its size was unimaginably huge. What's going on now? Wu Dezhao was furious. He was not afraid of the holy seed, and even enjoyed the feeling of fighting to the death with a holy seed of similar strength. However, this strange situation made him feel like a dog biting a porcupine, and he had no place to bite. Blood fetus. Lu Yi gritted his teeth and shouted. The egg-shaped object in his field of vision was clearly a blood fetus. Under normal circumstances, the blood race would be born from a blood fetus, but they were usually not big. After all, most of them were born from human women, so they naturally could not be that big. However, this blood fetus was ridiculously large. Lu Yi had a vague feeling that something incredible was going to be born from it. After all, this was a blood pool. The vast pool of blood was a freak formed from the combination of over 20 holy seeds. The blood fetus seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting in a rhythmic manner. As it expanded and contracted, the patterns on its surface flickered with sanguine light. Hundreds of human clan experts attacked from all directions, using all kinds of methods to bombard this abnormal blood fetus. However, the complex and mysterious patterns on the surface of the blood fetus seemed to have an extremely strong defensive power. All the attacks that hit it were unable to damage it in the slightest. Gather at one point. Jianghu shouted. Sword chi burst forth and shot toward a certain spot on the blood fetus. Seeing this, the others immediately followed suit. Lu Ye's attacks were mixed in as well. Everyone knew that no matter what was inside the blood fetus, they could not allow it to hatch peacefully. There was no existence in the world that could withstand the combined attacks of hundreds of human experts. A crater finally appeared on the blood fetus. Dense blood energy seeped out from within, turning into a bloody mist. However, it was quickly dispersed by a new wave of attacks. The crater gradually expanded, turning into cracks that spread out in all directions. Before long, the surface of the blood fetus was like a shattered mirror, covered in spiderweb-like cracks. At a certain moment, a crashing sound rang out as the blood fetus shattered. It was also at this moment that a frightening aura surged out of the blood fetus. Even someone as powerful as Jianghu couldn't help but be alarmed. Lu Yi had a very bad feeling about this. Please enter .com in your browser to view. Chapter 1181. When the blood fetus shattered on top of Jade Pillar Peak, a curled-up blood-colored figure slowly stretched out from within. The figure was so large that it seemed as indomitable as a speck of dust in comparison to the human experts standing in all directions. As far as the eye could see, the gigantic figure was formed purely by the extremely dense color of blood. It was like a skinless blood giant. The color of blood constantly flowed and surged on the surface of its body, forming vortexes of various sizes. It was a terrifying sight to behold. Judging from its body alone, it possessed many female characteristics, such as the flatness between its legs and the two towering peaks in front of its chest. This immediately reminded Lu Yi of his frightening guess from before. Looking down from above, the entire blood refinement realm looked like a female creature whose head and limbs had been chopped off, leaving only its torso. He couldn't help but wonder if the blood refinement realm was formed from the remains of a giant female creature after its death. Now that the blood giant in front of him actually possessed some female characteristics, could there be some connection between them? Jade Pillar Peak's location was also very special. If the blood refinement realm were to be the torso of an unknown female creature, then Jade Pillar Peak would be the location of the heart. The location of the heart was of utmost importance to any creature. Was there a deeper meaning to the gathering of the vampire holy seeds here? However, these thoughts were ultimately just random thoughts, and there was no way to verify them at this moment. The experts of the human clan never stopped attacking, but the effect was minimal. When the blood giant hatched from the blood fetus, everyone knew that they were in big trouble. No matter what kind of monster appeared in front of them, it was bound to be extremely powerful. There were many heads on the surface of the blood giant, as if there were sarcomas embedded on its surface. Upon closer inspection, those heads were clearly the appearances of the holy seeds that had been fused with the crimson dragon. However, at this moment, these holy seeds had clearly lost their consciousness. Their eyes were turbid and lifeless, as if they had suffered the cruelest torture. Their faces were filled with agony, and they kept opening their mouths to howl, but no sound came out. Lu Yi suddenly came to a realization as he gazed at the blood giant that almost filled his vision. This was indeed a trap. However, it wasn't a trap set up by the blood refinement realm's will against the saint seed of the blood race as the humans thought. Instead, it was a trap set up against the human experts. No matter how strange the will of heaven and earth of the blood refinement realm was, it had already given birth to a spirit and possessed a trace of intelligence. In the confrontation with Little Nine, it had completely fallen into a disadvantageous position. If it did not make some changes, once the saint seed of the blood refinement realm was exterminated, it would no longer have the possibility to make a comeback. In the end, it would be completely suppressed by Little Nine, and the foundation of the blood refinement realm would be swallowed by 9 regions. At that time, its existence would be erased because its existence was closely related to the foundation of the blood refinement realm. Once the foundation of the blood refinement realm was weakened to a certain extent, it would no longer be able to maintain its existence. The confrontation between the will of heaven and earth was like this. It would not be as intense as the battle between living creatures, and there would not be a life and death situation. Therefore, even if Little Nine had always occupied the absolute upper hand, there was no way to erase the will of heaven and earth of the blood refinement realm, because its existence was attached to the entire realm. Only when the foundation of the blood refinement realm declined, to a certain extent would it be eliminated. Therefore, it had to break the situation. That was why it had directed all the saint seeds to gather here. Since it had fallen into a disadvantageous position in the confrontation between the will of heaven and earth, it would personally fight, which was equivalent to opening up another battlefield. Many powerhouses of the human race had gathered here. If these hundreds of people were killed here, the blow to the cultivation world of 9 regions would be immeasurable. Although the number of remaining cultivators of 9 regions was still huge, no one could pose a threat to it. At that time, whether it was exterminating the cultivators of 9 regions or expelling them from the realm, it would be able to preserve the foundation of the blood refinement realm and its own existence. In the face of such a situation, could the powerhouses of the human race retreat? Obviously, it was impossible. Those gathered here were already the top forces of the cultivation world of 9 regions. If even they couldn't deal with this blood giant, then no one else had the ability to do so. It could be said that this was the only battle that had a chance to deal with the blood giant. The top powerhouses of 9 regions were duty-bound. The brilliant attacks were like a torrential storm. Every attack was extremely powerful. The blood on the blood giant's body surged, and craters appeared one after another. However, the flowing blood quickly filled up the craters. The incubation of the blood giant was undoubtedly affected. Under normal circumstances, it would still take some time for it to hatch from the blood fetus. However, under the ferocious attacks of the cultivators of 9 regions, the blood fetus was broken, and the incubation was brought forward. It was inevitable that it would be affected to a certain extent, and this effect was quite significant. This was because although the blood giant's power was frightening, it looked a little foolish. Ever since it was born, it had been standing there without moving, allowing the storm-like attacks to descend. It had no intention of dodging, nor did it make any moves to counterattack. It was only after a long time that it seemed to have come to its senses. It suddenly moved, reaching out its hand to grab in one direction. Its movements seemed extremely slow. In that direction, several powerhouses of the human race immediately moved to dodge, easily avoiding it. It continued to grab a few more times, but it was to no avail. This situation made the powerhouses of the human race calm down. If this was the extent of the blood giant's performance, then there was no suspense in this battle. Its body was too large, and its movements were too clumsy. It had a powerful aura, but it was unable to pose much of a threat to the human race. On the other hand, although the frenzied attacks of the human race were ineffective, they were constantly wearing down the blood giant's body. If this continued, as long as there was enough time, the human race of 9 regions would be able to forcefully wear down the blood giant. However, very soon, everyone realized that something was wrong. This was because the blood giant's movements were becoming more and more agile, faster and faster. It was as if it could rapidly grow in battle. This discovery made the cultivators of 9 regions feel terrible. They were even more careful when they hid. If they were really caught by such a huge creature, they would definitely not have a good ending. The battle on the Jade Pillar Peak was chaotic. Many spiritual treasures and spells were released, and spiritual energy surged chaotically. The snow within a radius of 10,000 miles had already melted, and the huge battlefield was intertwined with a fierce and intense aura. Lu Ye's expression was cold. He slashed out streaks of sword light as he carefully sensed the changes in the blood giant. In a place that no one else could sense, the blood giant was undergoing some changes. A change in its holy nature. Lu Ye could clearly sense that the blood giant's holy nature was steadily and rapidly increasing as time passed. It was born through the fusion of more than 20 holy seeds and the blood in the blood pool. The holy seeds had holy blood in their bodies, and the blood flowing from the blood pool also had holy blood. It was just that the holy blood hadn't been refined, and there was a lot of it. When it was just born, its holy nature was even weaker than Lu Ye's. Thus, it had always been in a suppressed state. This was probably the main reason why its movements were so slow in the beginning. However, as its holy nature continued to increase, its movements also became more and more agile. This was because the suppression of its holy nature was beginning to weaken. The reason why its holy nature was constantly increasing was probably because it was fusing with the holy blood in its body. This process should have been completed during the incubation process, but its incubation process was interrupted prematurely. Lu Yi knew that things weren't looking good. If the blood giant's holy nature continued to increase, it would surpass his sooner or later. At that time, the blood giant would reveal its true strength. So, if he wanted to win this battle, the key was to suppress the other party's holy nature, just like how he dealt with the blood race holy seeds. But even if he knew this key, Lu Yi didn't have a good way to deal with it. Holy nature wasn't something that could be improved just because one wanted to. This was definitely an existence more difficult to deal with than the insect queen in the insect tide sealed world. The insect queen's strength didn't lie in its body, but rather in its ability to quickly hatch a large number of insect race guards. This was why the Ninth Order masters of the 9 provinces had found it difficult to deal with it. In the end, it was Lu Yi who broke into the insect queen's nest and used the spread of the blood river and the power of his innate skill tree to devour the insect queen's vitality, slowly grinding it to death. The blood giant didn't have any guards. All of its strength was concentrated on its body. Compared to the insect queen, it was obvious who was stronger. Lu Yi couldn't use the same methods he used against the insect queen to deal with the blood giant in front of him. The blood giant's holy nature continued to increase, and correspondingly, its movements became more agile. Although its body was huge, it didn't hinder its use of many methods. For a time, many human race masters jumped up and down, creating a lively scene. The only good news at the moment was that this blood giant didn't seem to have much sentience, acting purely on instinct. It wasn't until a certain moment that Lu Yi clearly felt that the blood giant's holy nature had surpassed his own. One had to know that his holy nature could be said to be something that shouldn't exist in this world. No saint seed could reach his level of holiness because he had his innate skill tree. However, saint seeds had to take great risks to refine saint blood. Every time they refined saint blood, It was almost like walking through the gates of hell. This wasn't a situation that could be changed through practice. However, the blood giant seemed to be able to break through the barriers of refining Saint Blood. Just like Lu Yi, it was able to safely refine Saint Blood to improve its own holy nature. The accumulation of divine blood from more than 20 holy seeds would not have reached such a level. However, the divine blood in the blood giant's body was not only contributed by the holy seeds, but also a large amount of divine blood from the underground blood river that had not been refined. At a certain moment, Lu Yi felt that the blood giant's holy nature had surpassed his own. It was also at this moment that the blood giant's fists fiercely pierced out from left and right like two giant javelins. The human race masters gathered in two different directions dodged. However, in the next moment, a bloody light suddenly appeared under the blood giant's armpits. Two more arms appeared out of thin air, and like two bloody lights, they blasted out in two different directions. End of chapter. Chapter 1182. The change was too sudden. No matter how experienced the cultivators of the 9 states were, they had never encountered such a strange situation. After fighting for a long time, the blood giant's attacks were very monotonous. It was nothing more than punching and swinging. Although its movements became faster and faster, it didn't seem difficult to dodge. Thus, no one would have thought that this fellow would be able to grow 2 more arms. The blood giant's 2 new arms stretched out. One clenched into a fist, while the other turned into a palm. They attacked in 2 different directions. The place where the fist struck was where the spell cultivators were, including the sect leader and Yuji. During this period of siege, the spell cultivators had used the most ferocious and intense methods, so the blood giant naturally wanted to get rid of them first. And the location of the palm was where Lu Yi was. No matter how flawed its intelligence was, it could still sense the strong divine nature in Lu Ye's body. Perhaps it didn't understand why Lu Yi didn't listen to its call to fuse with it, but its desire for divine blood was instinctive. That was why it had targeted Lu Yi. Lu Ye's position was at the outer edge of the battlefield. It wasn't that he was a coward, but that the people present were all his seniors, so in this kind of battle, they were all intentionally or unintentionally protecting him, not allowing him to get too close. When the palm reached out, the figures in front saw that the situation was not good. They brazenly launched a few attacks, but they couldn't stop it at all. When Longbow dodged, he didn't forget to remind Lu Yi, "Run." Of course, Lu Yi would run. He had been paying attention to the changes in the blood giant's divine nature. He vaguely guessed that when the blood giant's divine nature surpassed his own, there would be some changes. In addition, he was standing at the outer circle, so there was room for him to dodge. When the huge hand that covered the sky reached out to grab him, he had already dodged backwards, narrowly avoiding the huge bloody hand. However, the strong wind that it stirred up still made his body unsteady. It was clear to see how powerful this grab was. If he was really grabbed like this, Lu Yi reckoned that he wouldn't be able to escape no matter what. At that time, there was a high chance that he would be crushed to death by the blood giant. He was scared but not in danger. However, the situation on the other side was not so good. Faced with the sudden attack of the fist, the spell cultivators hurriedly used various methods to block it. Some summoned defensive spiritual treasures, while others activated defensive spells. However, in the face of such a devastating attack, any defense was futile. The light of the spirit treasure dimmed and the protective spells shattered. Under the violent bombardment, several figures were sent flying away like paper kites. All of them coughed up blood and their auras weakened. Only the sect leader was able to rely on his powerful physique to remain unharmed. However, his chest was still bleeding profusely. With 2 swooshing sounds, 2 more arms grew out from under the blood giant's armpits and attacked in 2 different directions. Not only that, but the blood-red vortexes of various sizes on the surface of its body also flashed with blood-red light, turning into blood-red attacks that shot out in all directions. In an instant, the blood giant unleashed its full strength. Although its huge body still looked clumsy, it used all kinds of strange methods to beat the human powerhouses into a sorry state. Everyone was dodging, and the occasional counterattack was in vain. the situation suddenly became extremely unfavorable for the human side. Originally, when its holiness was not stronger than Lu Ye's, the 9 regions cultivators still had the initiative to attack. But when its holiness was stronger than Lu Ye's, it was as if it had gotten rid of an invisible shackle, and there was nothing that could restrict its strength. What made Lu Ye's heart heavy was that its holiness was still increasing, as if there was no limit. But Lu Yi knew that this was impossible. The blood giant's holiness came from 2 sources. One was the fusion of more than 20 blood race saint seeds, and the other was the saint blood contained in the blood flowing from the underground blood river. So, it must have a limit. But right now, it seemed that it had yet to reach its limit. He had already retreated from the battlefield and was only observing from a distance. It wasn't that he was afraid of fighting, but that he had to pay attention to the changes in the blood giant's holiness. Above Jade Pillar Peak, blood-red light flashed continuously. Human cultivators, figures flitted back and forth, and it looked extremely lively, but in reality, every step was filled with danger. Fortunately, the cultivators participating in the battle were all 9th Order Divine Sea Realm cultivators. With their coordination, they could temporarily contend with the blood giant, but it was hard to say what would happen in the long run. This kind of confrontation would consume their own strength, and it would take far too long. However, the cultivators would consume a lot of their strength, and any carelessness could result in them falling into an irrecoverable situation. The blood giant's offensive didn't just consist of the attacks of its 6 arms and blood-red light, it also had invisible spiritual energy attacks. Relatively speaking, these were the attacks that were impossible to guard against. These spiritual energy attacks all came from the saint seed heads on its body. These heads, which were embedded in its body like sarcomas, didn't seem to have completely fused. Surprisingly, they still retained the spiritual energy of the saint seeds when they were alive. At this moment, they couldn't directly participate in the battle, but they could still circulate their spiritual energy without hindrance. This meant that the cultivators of the 9 states weren't just facing the blood giant, but also the spiritual energy of more than 20 powerful saint seeds. Who can come up with a plan? We can't continue like this, someone said angrily. How many years had it been since they had encountered a situation where they could only take a beating without being able to fight back? Everyone felt aggrieved, but there was nothing they could do. More importantly, this situation was destined to not last for long. But at this moment, who could come up with a plan? Everyone was doing their best to dodge the blood giant's frenzied attacks, and also to protect their spiritual energy from being disturbed by the saint seeds. It could be said that these peak experts of the 9 states were constantly walking on the edge of life and death. Thrilling was no longer enough to describe their situation. "Bradley, have you seen anything? If you haven't, we need to retreat," Longbow called out loudly. As a result, Lu Yi was the most relaxed out of everyone. This was because he had jumped out of the battlefield after dodging the blood giant's attack and had been secretly observing the situation the entire time. Lu Yi was the best at dealing with saint seeds. Over the past 2 months, over 100 saint seeds had died at his hands. Moreover, he had the experience of turning the tide in the insect race's great secret realm back in the 9 states. As a result, when he saw Lu Yi secretly observing the situation, Longbow felt that there was hope, which was why he asked this question. If even Lu Yi didn't have a way to deal with this situation, then everyone could only retreat for now. They couldn't really have a battle to the death with the blood giant here, after all. Based on the current situation, the blood giant was indeed powerful enough, so powerful that over 100 of them were helpless against it. But in the end, it still hadn't exceeded the limits of this world's heritage. The size and heritage of the blood-refining world was similar to that of the 9 states. The blood giant was born here, but in terms of strength, it hadn't broken through the spirit sea realm because this world wasn't strong enough to give birth to a stronger existence. This was also the fundamental reason why the cultivators of the 9 states could barely deal with it. If the blood giant was truly an existence that had completely surpassed the spirit sea realm, then no one here would be able to escape. This wasn't the insect nest in the insect race's great secret realm, so they weren't trapped here. If they really wanted to escape, it wouldn't be a problem. As for what to do next, they could only plan for the long term. Conscripting an army to encircle and suppress the blood giant might be a good idea, but it might not work. Under such a ferocious attack from all directions, only a ninth-order Divine Sea Realm cultivator would be able to deal with it. Other cultivators wouldn't even be able to get close. "Hold on a little longer," Lu Yi shouted loudly. Longbow's eyes lit up when he heard this. Although Lu Yi didn't give him a clear answer, this sentence made him feel that this little brat probably had some kind of method. The battle was still fierce, but from the looks of it, the blood giant was crazily attacking while the cultivators of the 9 states were fleeing in all directions. Lu Yi was still observing. The good news was that the increase in the blood giant's saint attribute was greatly weakening. Although it was still increasing, the speed was slower than before. This also meant that the saint blood in its body had almost been completely refined, so even if it could still increase, it would be reaching its limit. Lu Yi let out a long breath. This situation was exactly what he had been waiting for, and also what he hoped to see. If the blood giant's saint attribute continued to increase endlessly, then there was really no way to fight this battle. He could only do as Longbow said and retreat first. "Seniors, please wait for a moment, I'll be back soon." After saying this, Lu Ye's figure flashed and he flew out. No one knew where he was going or what he was going to do at this critical moment, but everyone knew that when Lu Yi returned, it might be the time for a life or death battle with the blood giant. Unavoidable period staying here, they became more and more careful. If they weren't careful enough at this time and were killed or injured by the blood giant, then it wouldn't be worth it. Lu Yi flew for 200 li before coming to a stop. He had long since left the battlefield at the top of Jade Pillar Peak, but when he looked back, he could still see the intense battle there. Many blood-red lights pierced through the sky, almost breaking through the clouds. Lu Yi began to set up a teleportation formation. At the same time, several thousand li away from here, his clone, who was wearing the Scarlet Dragon battle robe and had a sword gourd hanging from his waist, stopped and began to set up a formation. Ever since Lu Yi realized that the key to today's battle was to suppress the blood giant's saint attribute, his clone had begun to rush over. Through the transit of the nearby Tianji pillar, it actually didn't take long for his clone to rush over to the battlefield. However, time was tight at the moment, so his main body ran out to meet his clone. This was to save as much time as possible. In just a few moments, the teleportation formation in front of his clone was set up. The clone stepped into the formation and poured his spiritual power into it. Under the distortion of space, his figure disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in front of his main body. Lu Yi raised his hand and pressed it against his clone. In the next instant, the clone disappeared, leaving only the Scarlet Dragon battle robe and the sword gourd on the ground. His main body, however, shook. A huge amount of saint attribute poured into his body, causing his blood and qi to surge and his spiritual power to surge. Please enter .com in your browser to view. Chapter 1183. More than 2 months ago, when the 9 Regions army attacked the Blood Refinement Realm, Lu Yi had condensed his own clone and had not recovered it. It was not that he did not have the ability, but there was no need. In the past 2 months, Lin Fan had been hunting holy seeds all over the place. His doppelganger had not been idle either. Although his doppelganger was inferior in terms of numbers, he had killed more than 30 holy seeds. The clone naturally had no reason to let go of the holy blood left behind by the holy seeds. It had all merged into its body. However, in terms of refining, the doppelganger was not as convenient as the main body because the doppelganger's foundation was only the root of the talent tree. It did not have enough talent tree fuel, so when refining the sacred blood, the doppelganger only retained its sacred nature. The enormous amount of energy contained in the sacred blood was removed to avoid affecting the doppelganger's strength. In other words, the clone also had an extremely powerful holy nature. Although it was much inferior to the main body, it was still a height that the blood race holy seeds could never reach. Now that the avatar had returned and merged with the main body, the powerful holiness was also brought into the main body. In an instant, Lu Yi felt that the holiness in his body had increased by leaps and bounds, and even his spiritual power was surging. The strength of this holy nature compared to the blood giant would only be known after a battle. If it was stronger than the other party, then there was a chance of winning today's battle. If it was still inferior to the other party, then he could only retreat first. At that time, Lu Yi would have to go deep into the underground blood river to search for more holy blood to improve his holy nature. Until the day when he could suppress the blood giant, then it would be time for the cultivators of the 9 regions to crusade against it. However, Lu Yi could faintly feel that in terms of holy nature, he had probably surpassed the blood giant. His holy nature came from more than 100 blood race holy seeds. No matter how powerful the blood giant was, it should not be able to reach this level. Putting away the scarlet dragon battle armor and sword gourd that had fallen to the ground, Lu Yi turned around and rushed toward the top of Jade Pillar Peak. The battle here was obviously more intense. Outside the battlefield, several figures were sitting down, and judging from their posture, they were recuperating. Less than half an hour had passed since Lu Yi left and returned. There were already several people injured, and from the looks of it, their injuries were not light. Well, it's inevitable with something like the blood giant. Once they were hit, it would not be a small injury. There was a confrontation. Unless he had a good defense or a strong physique. Everyone noticed Lu Ye's return and immediately diverted a portion of their attention to him. They all wanted to know what method Lu Yi would use to turn the situation around in this situation. Then, they saw a sea of blood spread out, as if a blood cloud had enveloped the huge Jade Pillar Peak. In an instant, the battlefield was covered in darkness. A surprising scene appeared. When the sea of blood spread out, the blood giant's movements became much more sluggish, and its attacks were not as ferocious as before. Within the blood sea, Lu Yi calmed down. Just as he had expected, in terms of holiness, he had the upper hand, and it was quite a big one. This caused a considerable amount of pressure on the blood giant. Its movements had become slower, and its attacks had become weaker. This was the most obvious sign of this. Many powerhouses of the 9 regions had been waiting for this opportunity. Now that the opportunity had arrived, how could they be lenient? They all activated their methods, and just like before, they attacked the blood giant from all directions. The waves of power that could destroy mountains and overturn seas struck the blood giant's body, and blood splattered in all directions. Some cultivators even attacked the heads of the sacred seeds directly. These heads were constantly using their spiritual powers to disturb the cultivators, which was really annoying. If they could get rid of these heads, there would be less of a hindrance. For a moment, the scene was intense, and the battle situation was shocking. In the previous battle with the blood giant, the most unbearable thing for the cultivators of the 9 regions was that they had no chance to attack at all. This was because the other party's attacks were too sharp and too concentrated. They could only use all their strength to dodge and resist. There was no chance of winning in such a battle. But now, it was different. Although the blood giant was still attacking, the cultivators of the 9 regions were not idle either. As long as they could attack the other party, they had a chance of winning. In the fierce battle. In the middle, Longbow's laughter shook the sky. "Good boy, I knew you were capable." Although he was not too sure why Lu Yi could suppress the blood giant after going out and returning, this kind of suppression clearly had something to do with the mysterious divine nature. As a human, he could not experience the existence of the divine nature at all. This kind of invisible power could only be felt by members of the blood clan. Lu Yi was not in a good situation at the moment. The blood giant had obviously sensed the source of the suppression, so many of its attacks were directed in his direction. Many mysterious blood techniques were launched from the vortexes on the blood giant's body, and they all attacked his blood sea in an attempt to kill him. The only thing Lu Yi could do was constantly move around in the blood sea, changing his position. At the same time, he activated the power of the blood sea to block the many attacks that were coming at him. In the fierce battle, the heads of the holy seeds that were embedded in the blood giant's body exploded one after another. Without the interference of the spiritual attacks, the cultivators of the 9 regions' attacks became even more ferocious. Even the cultivators who were still recuperating from their injuries in the distance joined the battle once again and used their own methods. The situation seemed to be very good, but in reality, everyone's hearts were tense. Because even in a suppressed state, the blood giant's attacks could not be underestimated. Anyone who came into contact with it would definitely die or be seriously injured. Only Ninth Order Divine Sea Realm cultivators could do such a thing. If their cultivation was slightly weaker, they would not be able to survive for long in such an intense battle. The blood giant should not have a physical body. Its body was purely formed by the huge blood sea, so even if countless attacks were to land on its body, it would be impossible to cause any physical damage to it. The many dents that were created by the attacks could be repaired in an instant. However, this kind of recovery would consume the blood giant's foundation. What the cultivators of the 9 regions were doing now was to continuously exhaust it until it completely disappeared. The effect was quite obvious, because everyone could clearly sense that the blood giant's body was constantly shrinking. This was a sign that its foundation was being consumed. Even so, no one was certain whether they would be able to win in the end. Because while the blood giant's foundation was being consumed, the strength of the cultivators of the 9 regions was also being consumed. This was destined to be a war of attrition. Even if the cultivators of the 9 regions currently had the absolute upper hand, the final victory would still depend on who could persevere longer. The blood giant's 6 arms were constantly waving as it continuously used its blood techniques. Its huge body was filled with points of strength. Even without the assistance of the spiritual energy released by the Saint Seed's heads, it was still an unshakable existence for a short period of time. When it waved its fist in a certain direction again, 2 sword lights suddenly bloomed. Immediately after, they rotated and met the fist like a spinning top. The huge fist hit the sword light, but it did not disperse the sword light. Instead, the rotating sword light went up along its arm, and wherever it passed, huge gullies were cut out on its bloody arm. At first glance, it looked as if the blood giant's arm was encircled by a dense sword ring made of sword chi. The sword chi soared into the sky, causing the blood sea that belonged to Lu Yi to ripple. In an instant, the sword ring rushed to the blood giant's upper arm. The sword lights dissipated, revealing 2 figures on the left and right. They were the 2 generations of sword masters of the North Xian sword sect. The one on the left was Jianghu, and the one on the right was Mu Suifeng. Although the 2 of them lived in different eras, they were still from the same lineage. The sword arts and sword Dao that they could use were of the same origin. When they revealed themselves, the 2 of them waved their swords in unison and slashed at each other. Their actions were so uniform that it was as if they were looking into a mirror. When the shocking sword light burst forth, the huge arm was cut off at the base and fell down. However, before it could land on the ground, it had already collapsed into a pool of blood. It was as if the sky was raining blood. The 2 sword masters' attack looked simple, but in reality, it was an attack with all their strength. After that attack, the 2 of them could not help but freeze slightly. Of course, the blood giant would not just take the attack and not fight back. The whirlpools in front of his chest suddenly formed a variety of blood arts and shot toward the 2 of them. There was an angry roar. Meng Jie's body suddenly exploded with a ball of golden light. No one knew what escape technique he used, but in a flash he was behind Jianghu and Mu Suifeng. He did not have time to take the 2 of them away. With a single kick, the 2 sword masters were sent flying. Then, he arched his body and a golden light appeared on his back. It was as if he was carrying a golden shield. Many blood arts bombarded this golden shield. In the blink of an eye, the golden shield dimmed and looked like it was about to shatter. However, Meng Jie was not a fool. How could he just stand there and not move? He had already floated forward along with the force of the attacks. "Be careful," someone shouted. Meng Jie immediately felt that something was wrong. However, before he could do anything, the sky that was already covered by Lu Ye's blood sea suddenly turned dark. A huge blood-red palm slapped down on him. This peak physical cultivation cultivator from the Vitality sect was like a fly. He was directly slapped to the top of the Jade Pillar Peak. The Spirit Peak trembled, and a huge pit appeared on the ground. This was not the end. The blood giant raised his foot and stomped down on the spot where Meng Jie had fallen. From the looks of it, he would not stop until Meng Jie was dead. Fortunately, there were other cultivators holding him back. That was why the blood giant's foot did not land on him. Wu Chang's figure flashed and arrived at the spot where Meng Jie had fallen. He pulled out his companion, who was covered in blood, from the big pit. After taking a closer look, he was relieved. "It's good that you're not dead." Meng Jie held his breath for a long time before he could breathe again. He felt that many bones in his body had been broken. Even with his strong physique, he was almost reduced to a state of serious injury after being slapped by the blood giant. Please enter .com to view it in your browser. Chapter 1184. The blood giant's severed arm grew back, as if it was completely unharmed. However, everyone keenly sensed that the blood giant's body had shrunk significantly as the arm grew back. The regeneration of the severed arm was clearly consuming its foundation, and the consumption was not small. This made everyone's eyes light up. There was no need to communicate. Everyone present was experienced in battle and naturally knew what to do at this time. Therefore, they all attacked the blood giant's 6 arms, and some even came up with new ideas to attack the blood giant's legs and head. The scene became even more lively than before. In the previous battle, because they had taken into consideration the consumption of each other, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures were more or less restrained when they attacked. They were afraid that they would consume too much energy and not be able to defeat the blood giant. If that really happened, the 9 prefectures' camp would most likely end in defeat. However, they no longer held back because they had found a better way to wear down the enemy. The blood giant probably did not expect that its 6 arms, which were originally its unique advantage, would become the key to victory for the cultivators of the 9 prefectures. In an instant, the hundreds of top cultivators of the 9 prefectures were divided into 9 battle groups. They each attacked one of the blood giant's arms, legs, or neck. The body and weapon cultivators charged at the front, attracting the blood giant's attention. They blocked the blood giant's counterattack, while the others activated their secret techniques and spiritual treasures, displaying their own methods to their heart's content. Loud rumbling sounds continued, and multicolored lights flew in all directions. Under such a situation, even the blood giant was somewhat tired of resisting. It focused all its energy on resisting the attacks of the cultivators of the 9 prefectures. Lu Yi suddenly became relaxed. Originally, because of the suppression of the divine attribute, the blood giant took care of him. However, how could it spare any energy to pay attention to Lu Yi now? The scene was still thrilling. While the cultivators of the 9 prefectures were wildly attacking, they also had to guard against the blood giant's counterattack. Even the body and weapon cultivators charging at the front were unwilling to be hit by the blood giant's attacks. Everyone's figure was nimbly moving. The battle continued, and another arm of the blood giant was cut off. The ones who succeeded were still the 2 sword masters who were working together. The killing power of the sword cultivators was evident. As the arm flew out, another rain of blood fell from the sky. When the blood giant grew another arm, its body had shrunk once more. Everyone saw the hope of victory, and their attacks became even more ruthless. At this moment, the blood giant opened its mouth and let out an indescribable roar. This was the first time it had spoken since its birth. The furious roar was so fierce that it was deafening. What accompanied it was boundless blood that gushed out from its mouth. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a sea of blood, and a vicious aura swept out in all directions. The blood river technique was the blood clan's specialty. As long as the blood race's cultivation had reached a certain level, they would be able to use this secret technique that combined both attack and defense. The blood race's experts were also used to using the blood river technique against their enemies because it was very easy to create a geographical advantage. One, it didn't make sense that the blood giant didn't know how to use the blood arts that the vampires were proficient in. The reason why it didn't use it was probably because its body was too big. It knew that even if it used it, it would not be able to hide its body with the help of the blood river. However, it was now at an absolute disadvantage, so it had no choice but to use this secret technique. Lu Yi had been waiting for this moment. His existence was the only way to suppress the blood giant, so he didn't do anything other than spreading his own sea of blood. Thus, he didn't make any unnecessary movements. Even when the blood giant targeted his attacks, he mainly dodged. In this kind of battlefield, it wasn't good for him to put himself in danger. If he was accidentally injured or disabled, then there would be no one to suppress the blood giant. However, it would be a different story if the blood giant used the blood river technique. As the blood giant's blood river spread out, the sea of blood that had been hanging above Jianghu Peak suddenly spread out. In the blink of an eye, the entire peak was enveloped in the color of blood, and not a single person could be seen. Their blood rivers collided, and waves splashed everywhere. Lu Yi used all his strength to forcefully merge his sea of blood with the other parties. It was the same method he had used to deal with the blood race's holy seed. The blood giant had no choice but to use the blood river technique. It probably didn't expect that such an action would hasten its death. That was because after their blood rivers merged, Lu Yi immediately activated the power of his talent tree and wildly devoured everything around him. He didn't need to do this when dealing with the holy seed because it was just a suppression of the holy seed's holiness. When the holy seeds couldn't take it anymore, he only needed to kill the holy seed. However, against the blood giant, pure suppression of the holy seed wasn't enough to win. The main purpose of this battle was to exhaust it. The more he devoured with the help of his talent tree, the more the blood giant would be exhausted. Originally, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures would be in such an environment. They would be restrained everywhere. However, with Lu Yi secretly guiding them, the situation was different. Originally, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures would be restrained everywhere in such an environment. However, with Lu Yi secretly guiding them, the situation was different. They could still maintain their sharp and precise attacks, and they could still maintain their previous cooperation. It could be said that the blood giant's blood river technique, not only did it not help it escape its predicament, but it also made its situation worse. Torrents surged in the blood river. The waves were fierce. The cultivators of the 9 prefectures were successful in their attacks. One after another, their buttocks were chopped off. Even the blood giant's head was chopped off once. However, for a strange existence like the blood giant, having its head chopped off wasn't fatal. Blood surged around the wound, and a new head quickly grew out. However, after being chopped again and again, the blood giant's body kept shrinking. Coupled with Lu Ye's constant devouring power, the blood giant finally couldn't take it anymore. Half a day after the start of the battle, the indomitable giant had shrunk by more than half. At this stage, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures had undoubtedly found it easier to deal with the blood giant. If the cultivators of the 9 prefectures were 30% on the offensive and 70% on defense in the previous battle, then they were now evenly matched. The more time passed, the better the situation became for the cultivators of the 9 prefectures. On the contrary, the blood giant would become more and more unbearable. At this point, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures would undoubtedly win. It was only a matter of time. The closer they got to this point, the more they didn't dare to be careless. They had already experienced the most dangerous moment. If they were to fail miserably when they were about to win, that would be a tragedy. After more than 2 hours, the blood giant's arms and legs were chopped off countless times. Its body shrank again. As its body shrank, the blood giant attacked. At this point, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures were already 70% on the offensive and 30% on defense. Of course, the sword cultivators were an exception. When sword cultivators faced their enemies, they would only attack and not defend. This was because they had always believed in the principle that the strongest attack was the best defense. Therefore, sword cultivators' battles were often extremely dangerous. Perhaps they would always be at a disadvantage in some battles. However, they would always be the ones to survive in the end. This was because in their battles, it might not be easy to determine victory or defeat, but life and death could be determined in an instant. The cultivators of the 9 prefectures were still as sharp as ever. They didn't show mercy because of the blood giant's weakness. At this point, everyone had expended a lot of energy and no longer had the ability to fight a similar battle. Naturally, they had to eliminate the blood giant from its roots. Lu Yi had been maintaining the devouring power of the innate skill tree, which had unknowingly sped up the battle. Until a certain moment, the blood giant, whose body had shrunk to only a few dozen feet tall, suddenly trembled. Its entire body also began to twist and change. At this moment, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures around it all made the same decision. They all retreated. Everyone knew that the blood tribe would self-detonate. Since the blood giant was proficient in all kinds of blood techniques, it shouldn't be a problem. It didn't make sense that it wouldn't self-destruct. The self-preservation power of a holy seed was already extremely terrifying, let alone a blood giant like this. Even though its body had shrunk greatly, it was still a huge creature that was a few dozen feet tall. If it self-destructed, there was probably no place on the entire Jade Pillar Peak that was safe. Everyone was on guard against such a situation. Therefore, when they saw the blood giant's abnormality, they had a countermeasure. Lu Yi didn't feel that it was using the blood explosion technique. This was because their blood rivers had merged. Therefore, his perception of the situation was more vivid than the others. When a member of the blood clan used the blood explosion technique, there was a very clear sign that their own aura would become extremely dangerous. The blood giant didn't have any dangerous aura. This situation seemed, on the contrary, it seemed that it was somewhat unable to maintain its huge body. After all, its incubation was incomplete. When it had just turned into a blood fetus, it was forcefully destroyed by the cultivators of the 9 prefectures. Therefore, strictly speaking, it was a defective product. When it didn't consume too much energy, it could still maintain its huge body. However, at this moment, it had consumed too much energy and was showing signs of collapsing. This was indeed the case. The blood giant's body was distorting more and more seriously. It was so serious that it was unable to launch any attacks. Although it was trying its best to maintain itself, it was ultimately futile. As far as the eye could see, its body would occasionally collapse. It would occasionally expand. Following another fierce expansion, its huge body suddenly exploded. The bloody color of FAU's body swept in all directions and rushed into the huge blood river. Was it dead? Lu Yi was stunned. After he recalled his doppelganger and returned, he knew that the cultivators of the 9 prefectures had an extremely high chance of winning this battle. However, he never expected that such a powerful enemy would appear. Unexpectedly, it ended in such a way. However, he quickly sensed that something was wrong. This was because there was still an extremely strange aura in the place where the blood giant's huge body had disappeared. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi sensed this strange aura, it had already pounced toward his location at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, it was right in front of him. It was so fast that Lu Yi didn't even have time to change his position. Amidst the bloody scene, an even denser bloody light was especially conspicuous. This bloody light had the outline of a person, but it didn't have any clear facial features. However, it had an extremely evil aura. Just like that, it directly crashed into Lu Ye's body. Chapter 1185. In the blood river, Lu Ye's body shook as he clearly felt something invade his body. He hurriedly checked his talent tree. Under normal circumstances, anything that invaded his body and was harmful to him would be burned by the talent tree. But what surprised him was that the talent tree did not react at all. This was somewhat abnormal. But soon, Lu Yi found out where the blood shadow had gone, because at this moment, his spirit sea suddenly became turbulent. If it were not for the soul-suppressing pagoda, he was afraid he would have become dizzy and lost his mind. He hurriedly stabilized his body and his divine sense surged. In the next moment, his soul avatar condensed in his spirit sea. Looking up, sure enough, there was a blood-red figure in his spirit sea. Just as he had seen before, a figure with a human outline and an evil aura. It was not that the talent tree was incompetent, but that the talent tree was powerless against this kind of invasion. The innate skill tree existed in his source spiritual cavity, which was the location of his dantian. At first, the innate skill tree could burn away all the energy flowing through his source spiritual cavity, eliminating anything that was harmful to Lu Yi. But as Lu Yi developed the innate skill tree's abilities, the range of this burning increased. Now, in theory, as long as it was a place his body could touch, the innate skill tree could burn and devour it. But the range of the talent tree's burning range did not include the spirit sea. Because the spirit sea was the place where a cultivator's spirit was condensed, the talent tree could not easily burn it, so as to avoid any damage to the spirit. If the spirit was really damaged, the cultivator would become mentally retarded. Lu Yi had felt this as early as when he fought with Lu Yueme. That day, Lu Yueme used some kind of treasure to force her way into his spirit sea as a soul avatar and fought with him. At that time, the talent tree did not react at all. This blood shadow should be the core of the blood giant. The blood giant's body collapsed, but it still remained. It wantonly rushed into Lu Ye's spirit sea, inadvertently avoiding the talent tree's power. Its goal was very simple. It wanted to take over Lu Ye's body and seize it. Possession. Lu Yi had only seen this kind of thing in some ancient records. At that time, he only felt that the cultivation world was full of strange things, but he had never heard of any cultivator in the 9 provinces who had such a method. He had never thought that he would encounter such a situation one day. He could only sigh at his good luck. In the Sea of Blood, there were hundreds of cultivators from the 9 continents. Why did Blood Shadow choose him? If it was his good luck, then it was naturally Blood Shadow's bad luck. At this moment, a large expanse of blood-red light appeared behind Shui Ying, attempting to envelop Lu Ye's sea of consciousness. The blood-red light clearly possessed great corrosive power. Once Lu Ye's sea of consciousness was completely invaded by the blood-red light, the entire sea of consciousness would belong to Shui Ying. His soul would either be destroyed or become Shui Ying's vassal. Neither of these was a situation that Lu Yi could accept. Fortunately, Lu Ye's soul was strong enough, and there was the soul-suppressing pagoda in his divine sea. As the blood-red light spread, the soul-suppressing pagoda also bloomed with a pure white light, resisting the blood-red light's corrosion. Having the experience of fighting over souls with Lu Yi was now familiar with the process. He raised his hand and grabbed at the void, and a long saber appeared in his hand. It looked exactly the same as the Panshan saber, but it was the soul-severing saber. Last time, he'd used this saber to cut Lu Yueme into pieces. As his figure moved, the seawater in the deity ocean also rose and fell, turning into fierce waves that followed closely behind him and spread to both sides. Seeing Lu Ye's fierce attacks, Blood Shadow still wanted to dodge, but a waterspout rushed out from below the divine sea, binding it like a rope. This was Lu Ye's divine sea, his home ground. The water of the divine sea was the manifestation of his soul's power. Any enemy who fought in this place would have to suffer the disadvantage of being in a geographical location. Lu Yueme had suffered greatly before, and now it was Blood Shadow's turn. It could only be said that Blood Shadow had chosen Lu Yi out of so many other targets. It was truly a tragedy. Blood Shadow barely managed to break free of the waterspout before it could dodge, and Lu Ye's saber slashed into its body. A gash immediately appeared on Blood Shadow's body, but no blood flowed out. Lu Yi didn't know what Blood Shadow's true nature was, but since it could so easily invade his divine sea, it should have something to do with his soul's power. However, since it was the blood giant's core, it was very likely that it was an existence that existed in between reality and illusion. Even without a mouth or nose, Lu Yi heard a shrill scream the moment the soul-severing saber struck Blood Shadow. That scream was formed by the fluctuations of soul's power. An existence like Blood Shadow was simply the bane of the soul-severing saber. Being struck head-on like this, Blood Shadow naturally didn't have a good ending. Lu Yi didn't show any mercy. The Panshan saber in his hand danced endlessly, transforming into a ball of saber light that enveloped Blood Shadow. Blood Shadow screamed incessantly as wounds appeared on Blood Shadow's body. Although those wounds were slowly healing, they weren't as fast as Lu Ye's attacks. In just a few short moments, Blood Shadow's body was covered in countless wounds, and its entire body was in tatters. Blood Shadow was clearly panicking. Originally, it had been fighting with all its might. If it succeeded, not only would it be able to escape death, but it would also immediately obtain a new life. Blood Shadow didn't have much intelligence, and it had chosen Lu Yi mostly out of instinct. This was because Lu Ye's cultivation was the lowest among everyone present, so it would be the easiest to kill. It was also because Lu Yi was the only one with a powerful divine nature. This was extremely attractive to Blood Shadow. Thus, it hadn't chosen Lu Yi unintentionally, but instinctively. In the end, not only had it failed, but it had also fallen into an even more dangerous situation. In the previous battle, Lu Yi hadn't done much, mainly because he was the only one who could suppress the Blood Giant. He had to ensure his own safety first. Being in such an intense battle, his fighting spirit had long since surged. He never thought that he would have the opportunity to personally participate. In just a few short moments, Blood Shadow had been defeated like the wind. It instinctively wanted to escape from this dangerous world because it had already sensed that if it didn't leave now, it really would die here. However, while it had come easily, it wasn't so easy to leave. After all, this was Lu Ye's home ground. Before he attacked, Lu Yi had already considered the possibility that his opponent would escape, so he immediately activated the power of the deity ocean, using the water of the deity ocean to surround the battlefield. If Blood Shadow wanted to leave, it would first have to break through the blockade of the deity ocean's water. Perhaps it had the ability to do so without any interference, but at this moment, Lu Yi was relentlessly pursuing it, so it had no time to break through the blockade of the seawater. The sharp, ear-piercing screeches hadn't stopped since the beginning. This battle was much simpler and easier than the Battle of Souls with Lu Yuemin. It was also far less intense than the battle against the Blood Giant just now. This was a simple battle where Lu Yi crushed his opponent in all aspects. Blood Shadow tried to escape, but there was nowhere to run. The soul-severing blade in Lu Ye's hand never left its side, constantly causing it harm. Blood Shadow's aura became weaker and weaker, and its figure became thinner and thinner. Until a certain moment, Lu Ye's long blade swept out, and a dazzling light suddenly shot out from the deity ocean, as if a great sun had risen above the sea. The great sun suddenly exploded, and in an even more dazzling light, a lotus flower formed by the blade light slowly bloomed. The third form of the tyrant blade, Lotus Sun. One Lu Ye's figure stood in the center of the lotus flower, and there was no trace of Blood Shadow in front of him. Only a speck of fluorescent light floated above the soul-severing blade. The light gradually disappeared, the raging waves subsided, and the turbulent deity ocean calmed down. Lu Yi looked at the speck of light with rapt attention and raised his eyebrows slightly. Blood Shadow had been killed, but it had left behind this speck of light. He couldn't figure out what this speck of light was. He raised the soul-severing blade and tried to slash it a few times, but he couldn't cut it. However, after carefully sensing it, he could tell that this thing didn't seem to be harmful to him. Lu Yi raised his hand and grabbed at the speck of light. With a grab, the speck of light melted into his palm like snowflakes, and in the next moment, a lot of information inexplicably appeared in his mind. Lu Yi calmed his mind and carefully examined it. He soon figured out the true identity of the speck of light. It was a trace of Blood Shadow spirit. The Blood Shadow had been defeated, but this trace of spirit had survived, but it wouldn't last for long. Even if Lu Yi didn't care about it, it would soon die. However, Lu Ye's actions allowed him to obtain a lot of information from the remnant spirit. Little Nine was right. The will of heaven and earth in this world was not a pure will of heaven and earth. That was why it possessed a sliver of intelligence. When it sensed that it could not compete with Little Nine, it withdrew from the battlefield where it was fighting Little Nine and turned to open up a new battlefield. That Blood Shadow could be regarded as the world will of this world. Under normal circumstances, this was impossible. The will of heaven and earth was the aggregation of the complex information of the entire world. It was vast, ethereal, and untouchable. It was impossible for it to be manifested in a form that could be observed, let alone a bloody shadow like that. However, the special characteristics of blood-refining realm had caused this situation to occur. The information Lu Yi obtained was very messy. After all, the Blood Shadow had been killed, so the remaining information in the last trace of spirit was naturally incomplete. But from this messy information he still learned a lot of unknown truths. The most important point was that a bold guess he had before was actually true. blood refining realm was really the remains of a powerful female life form after her death. 2. It was impossible to find out how such a powerful creature died. This was destined to be an extremely ancient secret. They only knew that her ruined body drifted about in the void for countless years, turning into a realm and then giving birth to living creatures. The underground blood river that covered blood refining realm was the blood vessels of this dead powerhouse, and the blood that flowed through it was her blood. This was also the fundamental reason why the blood race had bloodline inheritances. When the blood fetus was hatched in the blood river, it imperceptibly received the many mysteries contained in the blood, so it was born with knowledge. 6. Chapter 1186. Perhaps it was unwillingness to die, or perhaps it was its own remnant thoughts, but after countless years of accumulation and various coincidences, a very special existence was born in the blood refinement realm. It was the blood shadow, which could also be called the blood spirit. It was born from the heavens and earth, and was also formed from a drop of blood from the heart of the powerful female creature after her death. To some extent, its existence itself was the continuation of the will of the female creature. The foundation of the blood refinement realm was the remnant body of the female creature. The blood spirit born in such an environment could naturally be regarded as the will of heaven and earth of the entire world. It was ignorant and unintelligent, but it had a trace of its own spirit. So when the cultivators of the 9 regions invaded this realm, it instinctively reacted, and that was to send down heavenly punishment. Unfortunately, it was obstructed by Little 9. In the confrontation of the will of heaven and earth, it fell into a disadvantage. Driven by instinct, it left the battlefield with Little 9 and sent down instructions to all the remaining holy seeds in this realm, telling them to gather on the Jade Pillar Peak. This location was the heart of the female creature, and also the place where the blood trail was born. It had an extremely special meaning to the blood spirit, and only in this place could it display its full strength. What happened next was simple. Under its call, the holy seeds that came here were fused together by it without any resistance. With its own existence as the core, it turned into a giant with solid blood, competing with the many powerhouses of the 9 regions. If Lu Yi did not exist, or if Lu Ye's divine nature could not suppress it, the experts of the 9 regions would have most likely failed in this battle. At that time, such a blood giant would sweep in all directions, and it would be a great trouble. But the affairs of the world were unpredictable. Its divine nature was suppressed by Lu Yi, giving the experts of the 9 regions a chance to eliminate it. A shocking battle broke out, and the blood giant that could sweep across the entire blood refinement realm collapsed. At the last moment, the blood spirit found Lu Yi, wanting to seize his body. How could it have a good ending? Many things became clear. Little 9 had said before that the will of heaven and earth of the blood refinement realm was not like a simple will of heaven and earth, and it was not a special existence like the blood spirit. It was just that Little 9 did not understand what the will of heaven and earth of the blood refinement realm was. Now, it knew that it was indeed special, so special that even if time was reversed, under the same environment, the same blood spirit might not be born again. There were also many things that Lu Yi did not understand. For example, why was its summoning able to make the holy seeds fuse with it? Why was its holiness able to surpass the limits of the holy seeds? But at this moment, there was no point in probing into this. The winner was king while the loser was in the wrong. Just like how the vampire holy seeds couldn't understand how a human like Lu Yi could possess such a powerful holiness that all the other holy seeds felt despair. Familiar voices echoed in his ears, especially the sect leaders, which was the most urgent. After the blood giant collapsed, Lu Yi suddenly froze in place. The sea of blood spread out, and no one knew what had happened. They only vaguely sensed that Lu Yi had encountered some kind of trouble. Otherwise, there was no way he wouldn't have reacted to their shouts. Amidst this kind of anxiety, the sea of blood that filled the skies suddenly shrank. In the next moment, the darkness that had covered the top of Jade Pillar Peak for a long time dissipated. It was already nighttime. There was no cloud in the dark moon, and the sky was filled with stars. The sect leader immediately looked in Lu Ye's direction. Seeing that he was safe and sound, he was still worried and asked, "Is there anything wrong?" Lu Ye shook his head. His soul battle with Sanguis did not last long. Moreover, no one present had noticed that Sanguis wanted to possess him. Therefore, there was no need to mention it. Longbow's loud voice rang out, "Ye brat, is that big guy dead?" In the end, when the blood giant collapsed, everyone hurriedly distanced themselves from it. Moreover, the blood sea was concealing it, so no one could clearly see what had happened. They only knew that after that, the blood giant's aura disappeared. While Lu Yi and Sanguis were fighting, they had also searched the blood sea but to no avail. Among the people present, the only one who could determine what would happen to the blood giant was Lu Yi, who had been maintaining the blood sea all this time. "He's dead. Congratulations, seniors. The last trouble of the blood refining realm has been solved. We, the 9 regions, have won." Long Xiang Ba Si Ba Si Ba. Yang Pi is so weird, but it's still a good thing. This old man is exhausted. In the eyes of the experts of the 9 regions, the blood giant had dissipated. It was indeed somewhat inexplicable. Even if it was suppressed and destined to be defeated when Rui Fen defended against Yi Bo, it still had the ability to continue fighting, so there was no reason for it to suddenly collapse. However, if one were to consider its next move, its collapse would seem to be a matter of course. After receiving Lu Ye's confirmation, the hundreds of people one by one landed on the Jade Pillar Peak. This battle exhausted the hundreds of cultivators of the 9 regions. Many of them repeatedly wandered on the edge of life and death. It could be said that except for a few people, everyone else was injured. Especially the body and weapon cultivators at the front, their injuries were not light. Now that the battle was over, it was naturally time to heal. However, Longbow was not idle. His loud voice still shook the sky. "I say, everyone, after this battle, we can be considered to have pacified the blood refining realm. Shouldn't we celebrate?" Pang Zhen glanced at him weakly. "Your arm is broken. Don't you feel uncomfortable? Heal first. We'll talk about the celebration when we return to the 9 regions." Both of them were body cultivators and soldiers of their respective camps. They had been working together since the insect disaster. Even if they had any grudges before, after experiencing so much together, they more or less sympathized with each other. Longbow smiled. "My arm is only broken. It's not new. However, you're right. We'll talk about the celebration when we return to the 9 regions." The celebration banquet after the main calamity was not organized properly. It was mainly because Lu Yi had thrown out the blood refining realm. This shocking news caused everyone to be in no mood to hold a celebration banquet. Now that the blood refining realm was a big problem, everyone had hope of reaching the upper realm in the future. This matter should indeed be handled properly. As they spoke, they found a place to sit cross-legged and took a spirit pill to heal their injuries. Everyone was healing their injuries. Only Lu Yi did not need to because he did not suffer any injuries in this battle and did not consume much energy. After the blood giant died, there was no sacred blood left behind. This was a strange thing. This was not the same as when Lu Yi killed the sacred seed. Lu Yi suspected that all the sacred blood was completely consumed by the blood spirit to maintain the blood giant's huge body. To him, this was not something worth paying attention to. Aside from increasing his holiness, the sacred blood could also increase his strength by absorbing the massive amount of energy contained within the sacred blood during the refining process. Now that the blood refining realm was settled, Lu Yi did not need to increase his holiness. As for the huge amount of energy contained in the sacred blood, if he really wanted to cultivate, the safest and fastest way was to rely on the golden spirit stick, not refining the sacred blood. He sat quietly on the side, protecting these seniors even though they did not need it. At the same time, he was quietly communicating with Little Nine, telling it about the existence of the blood spirit and the foundation of the world's will. Little Nine suddenly realized. No wonder I felt it was a little strange. It turns out that there was such a way. But fortunately, it was solved in the end. The essence of the blood refining realm, did you know before? Logically speaking, the blood refining realm was formed by the remains of a female creature. Little Nine most likely knew, but it had never told him about this. Little Nine quickly denied. I didn't know, how could I know? My understanding of the blood refining realm is not much more than yours. In the 9 provinces, I know everything because I am the 9 provinces heaven's secret. But I don't know about other realms. The problem of the blood refinement realm was basically solved. Even if the remaining vampires were still in hiding, they wouldn't be able to do anything. It wouldn't be long before they were all wiped out. However, there was something else that Lu Yi was concerned about. What is the Dragon Soaring Realm's secret realm? Blood race once appeared there, and there is also a blood realm. Secret realms like the Dragon Soaring Realm and the Myriad Beast Realm. They are all fragments of worlds that I captured. Although those worlds were destroyed, the things that happened in those worlds and the people that existed there left some traces. The dragon trace is the Dragon Soaring Realm. When I captured it, its will of the world had not completely disappeared, so I was able to use it. Using methods, I was able to reshape the various events of a certain critical period in that realm. Take the Peerless Continent that you went to as an example. If the cultivators of the 9 provinces did not go to save them, the human race of the Peerless Continent would have most likely been exterminated. Only the corpse race could survive there. Once I captured it, it would also become a secret realm of the world, allowing cultivators of the Cloud River tier to enter to gain experience. So there really is a blood realm in this world, and the foundation of that blood realm is most likely another part of the body. In ancient times, a powerful female creature was beheaded in the void, and part of her torso turned into the blood refining realm. Then what about the head and other parts of her body? The blood realm was most likely evolved from the other part of the female creature's body, so it could give birth to the blood race like the blood refining realm. Lu Ye's scalp was a little numb. Little Nine, I have a bad feeling. What do you mean? The bloodline inheritance of the blood race mentions something. When the blood arts are cultivated to the highest level, they can be reborn from a drop of blood. I thought it was nonsense, but now it seems that it may not be false. Do you think this dead female life form is still alive? At the very least, the part of her head is still alive. Now, could it be that she is searching for her own body in the void? And could there be some undetectable connection between her body and her head? Little Nine's voice was calm. Are you scaring me or scaring yourself? It's purely a discussion. This kind of thing may not be impossible. If such a situation really happens, then our 9 provinces will be completely exposed. So you need to be strong. Even if such a situation really happens, as long as your human race is strong enough, you can naturally deal with all kinds of dangers from the void. Lu Yi thought for a moment and had to admit that what Little Nine said was very reasonable. 3. Chapter 1187. This time, Lu Yi and Little Nine talked a lot, including the future development of the situation and the various changes that might occur in the blood refinement realm in the future. It also allowed Lu Yi to gradually understand how the foundation of the 9 provinces would be improved, and how the top elites of the 9 provinces could reach the upper realm. The reason why the cultivators of the 9 regions went on an expedition to the blood refining world was not only to protect themselves, but also to seek their own future. Saving the suffering humans of this world was actually just a side benefit. Of course, this did not mean that this matter was not important. This matter was also very important. Otherwise, during the expedition, the major sects of the 9 regions would not specially send cultivators to guard the villages where humans gathered to protect their safety. Little Nine had mentioned some of these key points to Lu Yi before, but it was only a general description. It was only today that he saw the whole picture. It had to be said that the 9 provinces had Little Nine, which was the fortune of the humans of the 9 provinces. Under its planning and arrangement, the situation of the 9 provinces would definitely get better and better, and the benefits would depend on the efforts of the humans of the 9 provinces. There was a limit to what Little Nine could do, but the future of the human cultivators was unlimited. There would be a day when the humans of the 9 provinces would definitely reach the height that their ancestors had reached, or even surpass it. After a few days, everyone had more or less recovered. For the time being, those who had not fully recovered needed time to settle down, so they all dispersed. Just as Lu Yi was about to leave, Lan Qiue came. A few days ago, she was inspired by the blood spirit. At that time, her thoughts were in a mess, and she could not control herself. However, after the blood spirit died, she returned to normal. However, she still maintained the direction she was going, mainly to see what was attracting her here. When she arrived and saw Lu Yi, she understood the whole story after a detailed discussion. She was secretly shocked and broke out in a cold sweat. She was only glad that she was far enough away from the Jade Pillar Peak at that time. Otherwise, she was afraid that the blood spirit would have merged into the blood giant's body, and at that time, she would have died without a doubt. The expedition of the 9 provinces to the blood refinement realm entered the final stage. Almost 80% of the 9 provinces' cultivators above the Cloud River tier were now scattered all over the blood refinement realm, searching everywhere for the traces of the fish that had escaped the net. Once the remnants of the blood race were discovered, they would immediately be inhumanely besieged. More than 10 days later, nearly 3 months after the start of this war, the Holy Master of the Jade Blood Holy Land, Feng Wujiang, led many top elites of the human race jointly issued a notice. This war had won a complete victory. The blood race in the blood refining world had been exterminated. When the news spread out, the whole world rejoiced. In this war, the cultivators of the 9 regions benefited a lot, but the ones who benefited the most were the humans of the blood refinement realm. From now on, they would no longer live like pigs or dogs, no longer be enslaved by another race, no longer have to live in fear, and no longer have to live day after day. After several months of contact, the human race in this world also knew about the existence of 9 regions. They had a natural closeness to the 9 regions cultivators who saved them from the fire and water, especially those 9 regions cultivators who were responsible for guarding the various human race villages. Recently, they had gained a lot of support. The war was over, and the next thing to do was naturally to divide the benefits. This was the proper process, and also what the cultivators of 9 regions deserved. Even if it was not as an invader, but as a savior, for 9 regions, the blood refining realm was still a piece of fat meat. Its territory was vast, only slightly inferior to that of 9 regions. The foundation of the whole world was almost the same as that of 9 regions. Who wouldn't want to take a bite of such a big piece of fat meat? The most important point was that the number of humans here was quite large. Even if they were oppressed by the blood race all year round and lived a precarious life, the population of the blood refinement realm was only a little more than that of 9 regions. This was because although the blood race treated the humans here as blood food, they would not do such a thing as draining the pond to catch all the fish. This happened when they first came to the blood refinement realm. The humans who lived in the first village had some mental pressure. Apart from that, there was no problem in life. In addition, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the blood refinement realm was far stronger than that of the 9 regions. In addition to worrying about the predation of the blood race, the humans here actually lived a carefree life. All these factors created the huge population base of the blood refinement realm. What was the foundation of the cultivation world? It was those numerous mortals who had no cultivation aptitude. This was the common understanding of all the cultivators in the 9 regions. As long as the foundation of mortals was large enough, the world of cultivation would be filled with them. Only then could the cultivation world flourish, and generations of cultivators emerge one after another. The general trend was like this, so in the 9 regions, every sect had its own territory. The sects could only recruit disciples from their own territory, and it was not easy to cross the boundary. In the beginning, in order to expand the scale of the bottom-level disciples of the Blue Blood sect as soon as possible, the sect master even went to other sects' recruitment ceremonies to snatch disciples. As a result, he was chased to Ao Mountain by the sect master and had a fight with the sect master. This matter was the sect master's fault, and he deserved to be chased and beaten. After the blood refinement realm was taken down, the major sects of 9 regions naturally began to divide up the territory. In fact, it was not too complicated, because in the process of conquering the blood refinement realm, all the sects, large and small, had already realized this matter. Almost tacitly, each of them circled the territory of their own sect in the blood refinement realm. Their approach was very simple, that was, they scattered their disciples in the circled area, just like how beasts would use their urine to circle their territory, but the cultivators of 9 regions did it more elegantly. Before the war ended, it was not easy to announce this matter. Now that the war was over, there was no need to hesitate. They all had a tacit understanding. The lower-ranked sects had a smaller area, while the higher-ranked sects had a larger area. The Blue Blood sect also circled a large territory. Thanks to Lu Ye's foresight and Little Nine's secret help, with the Tianji pillar of the wrestling grotto heaven as the center, the area within a radius of 100,000 miles could be considered the Blue Blood sect's territory. This was because this area was originally Lan Qiue's work. It was a territory controlled by the blood race's holy sage. Although Lan Qiue had not gone through the process of joining the Blue Blood sect, the news had already spread. The territory under her belonged to the Blue Blood sect, and this was a matter of course. Moreover, the blood race in this area were all cleaned up by the Blue Blood sect. This was a huge territory, larger than any of the sects in 9 regions. Compared to the Blue Blood sect's territory in 9 regions, it was 2 to 3 times larger. The Ziwei Daoist Palace benefited from the Blue Blood sect and circled a piece of land in the nearby area. The purpose of enclosing the territory was not for the territory, but for the human race living in this area. With a large enough population base, it would inevitably contribute various talents to the various sects in 9 regions in the future. On one point, although the cultivation world of 9 regions had discussed, they had reached a consensus. That was, it was not appropriate for all the humans in the blood refining world to migrate. Because there were too many people, if they really migrated to 9 regions, it would suppress the living space of the humans in 9 regions. Therefore, it was best for the humans in the blood refining world to stay in the blood refining world. At that time, each sect would send their remaining people to build a branch sect in their own territory in the blood refining world. The purpose was to select all kinds of good seedlings suitable for cultivation. Once they found them, they would send them to 9 regions to cultivate. Of course, this was the follow-up plan. The entire blood refining world was almost completely divided up by the various sects in 9 regions in a very short period of time. Except for one place, it was the Blue Blood Holy Land. Although the Blue Blood Holy Land was not big, the number of humans living in it was not small. After decades of development, the number and quality of cultivators it had was almost not inferior to any of the top sects in 9 regions. What they lacked was only 9th-order Divine Sea Realm cultivators. Because even after decades of development, a large number of Divine Sea Realm cultivators had emerged in the Blue Blood Holy Land, but there was not enough time for them to reach the 9th order. If such a force was pulled back to 9 regions and added to a certain sect, then no matter what grade that sect originally was, it would become a colossus. However, the Blue Blood Holy Land could not be coveted by others. If it really wanted to be integrated into a sect in 9 regions, it would be none other than the Blue Blood sect. After all, it was brought up by Feng Wujiang. Before the cultivators of 9 regions invaded the blood refining world, the Blue Blood Holy Land was the only pure land for the human race in this world. It was also the front line against the blood race. Since the Blue Blood sect was almost removed from the list by Heaven's Secret, although it had gone through several ranks, it still had not returned to the First Order. At present, according to Heaven's Secret's evaluation, the Blue Blood sect was only a 3rd Order sect, and this was because the sect had 3 Divine Sea Realm cultivators. If there were no Divine Sea Realm cultivators, it would not even be rated as a 3rd Order sect. If it could be supplemented by the power of the Blue Blood Holy Land, it would be just around the corner for it to return to the First Order sect. Your eldest senior brother's meaning is that if our sect is willing to accept the cultivators of the Holy Land, he will order all the cultivators of the Holy Land to join our sect. I believe that those people will also listen to the order. When the time comes, they will help our sect to return to the First Order sect's glory. In the wrestling cave, the 3 Divine Sea Realm cultivators of the Blue Blood sect gathered. The sect master said this and asked Shui Yuan and Lu Yi for their opinions. What do you think? Shui Yuan had no opinion. You can make the decision. All right. Lu Yi looked at the sect master. What does the sect master think? The sect master laughed. This old man came to ask you, why did you ask again? Yes. Lu Yi smiled. Since the sect master came to ask, it means that you do not agree with this approach. This disciple also has the same idea. It is best not to integrate the power of the Blue Blood Holy Land into our sect. Yes. What do you mean? The sect master raised his eyebrows. Lu Yi said, first of all, it is the problem of a sense of belonging. The 9 regions sects usually recruit disciples when they are young or when their cultivation is not high. This is to facilitate the cultivation of the disciples' sense of belonging to the sect. The power of the Blue Blood Holy Land is indeed not to be underestimated, but many of them have already achieved success in their cultivation, and many of them are in the Divine Sea realm. If such a force joins our sect, it will indeed raise our sect's grade in a short period of time, but in the long run, it may not be a good thing. They respect eldest senior brother, not the Blue Blood sect, so they will not have a great sense of belonging to our sect. Even if they have good morals, if they really join our sect, it will have a huge impact on the existing structure of our sect, and it will be detrimental to the growth of the disciples below. Please enter .com to view the latest update in your browser. Chapter 1188. Hearing this, the sect leader nodded. He had also considered this matter, and Bai Ran knew that Lu Yi was right. This was also Ju's concern. There's another point. The Jade Blood Holy Land was named after the Jade Blood Holy Land. It was also led by Master Jing, but in fact, it was not only eldest senior brother who contributed, but also those old seniors with top-notch strength. Therefore, the power of the Holy Land of Jade Blood should not be read. It will become the private property of this sect. It belonged to the entire 9 prefectures. Right now, the 2 factions had put aside their former enmity and were sincerely cooperating. I really shouldn't do anything that would attract the disdain of others. If I really do stir up the power of the Jade Blood Holy Land, then I'll have to deal with them. Maybe we're on the bright side. They wouldn't say anything. But what was he thinking? No one knew. The first skill was 2 carries. His expression was one of relief. The disciple that Evil Moon Valley had inadvertently recruited had grown up. He was also very thorough in his considerations. Recently, whenever he asked, he often recalled the scene of that day. He was only glad that Lu Yi had chosen the green leek landscape. Otherwise, if they really missed out on such an outstanding disciple, they really didn't know which sect would benefit. Third, the benefits that our clan has obtained from this expedition are already large enough. Not to mention other things, the size of the territory that I have demarcated does not match our clan's current grade. They even surpassed all the first-rank clans. Just this alone. No one else will. They said that it was because the disciples had worked hard and made great contributions in this expedition, so this was what our Jade Master sect deserved. He said it with a calm expression because it was the truth. But if we accept the power of the Jade Blood Holy Land, it'll be the same as accepting the mortals of the Jade Blood Holy Land. The Jade Blood Holy Land isn't large, but it's densely populated. The base number was huge. It was equivalent to encircling another piece of land. His table manners were a bit unsightly. The sect master was pleased. It's rare for you to consider everything so thoroughly. In fact, your eldest senior brother also said that he didn't recommend this old man to gather the strength of the Jade Blood Holy Land. The concerns he raised are basically the same as what you think. Lu Ye laughed and said, coming from the same school, naturally we have the same idea. And so, the matter was settled. The Blue Blood sect was the Blue Blood sect. The Blue Blood Holy Land was the Blue Blood Holy Land. The 2 would not merge into one, so there was no need for him to deliberately spread the news. After the dust of the blood refining realm settled, the Blue Blood Holy Land would be able to enter the Blue Blood Holy Land. The Jade Blood Holy Land would choose a piece of land in the 9 prefectures and establish a foothold there. At that time, all the cultivators in the Holy Land would be transferred to the new Suo sect in the 9 regions. The refinement realm was not a place where cultivators could continue to redeem themselves. Perhaps it wouldn't be a problem for a while. However, as time passed, the foundation of this world would fade away, and the number of worlds would decrease. At that time, the cultivators would have to continue living in this world. Then it's going to get better. It was difficult to walk. The boundless upper realm. This was a situation that no cultivator could tolerate. The scattered cultivators of the 9 regions began to gather again, and the place where they gathered was the place where they first came from, which was next to the pillar of Tianji. Where the Tianji pillar was located, there were also many cultivators who were busy. On the other side of the wrestling net, with Lu Yi in the lead, a large group of people were busy setting up the array. The array formation he set up was very simple. It was a large array formation. The mechanism of this formation was very simple. It was used to gather spiritual energy. It was an auxiliary formation. Most of the time, they were used as internal facets of other formations to support the operation of other formations. The positions of the other pillars of heavenly secrets were basically the same. The purpose of the formation was to gather spiritual energy, in order to prepare for the impending suspension of navigation from the alchemy realm. This was different from the 9 prefectures. The blood-refining realm had always been in a moving state. This was also what the cultivators of the 9 regions had seen back then. It was because the starlight of the blood-refining realm was getting brighter and brighter. Because the blood-refining realm had always been close to the 9 regions, the closer it was, the easier it was for Byran to see it. If the entire blood-refining realm was compared to a large ship sailing in the starry sky, then the route of this large ship was coincidentally facing the location of the 9 regions world. If they left it alone, this huge realm would directly collide with the 9 regions. At that time, it would definitely be a disaster that would destroy the realm. The Blood Clan had already died. The only Blood Clan that was still alive was Lan Chiua. After 3 months of campaigning, they finally won. The cultivators of the 9 regions did not want to see the tragic scene of their hometown being destroyed. Fortunately for this scene, Little Nine had a plan. However, he needed the cultivators of the 9 regions to put in a little effort. This matter was spread out through Lu Ye's mouth. Because the formation was simple, it was not difficult for Lu Yi to set it up. The difficult part was that the scope of good was wide, and the country was next to every pillar of heavenly secrets. At that time, there would be a large number of doctors to tear apart. They were so busy for more than 10 days. Next to more than 100 pillars of heavenly secrets, a large formation was set up. Within the range of the formation, each cultivator regardless of their cultivation realm. They all sat cross-legged and concentrated. The cultivators gathered at the wrestling grotto heaven were not only by Yuqin and Su Tang Chaoyan. Because the number of cultivators from the 2 sects was too small, there were cultivators from other sects who came. Lu Yi sat in front of the heavenly secrets pillar. Little Nine could not be shown in front of others, so he was responsible for everything. What he had to do was to wait for Little Nine to give a signal at the right time. Wait for the signal. The battlefield imprint suddenly moved. Lu Yi checked and Little Nine's signal came. He immediately shouted, "Begin! Begin!" At the same time, he injected spiritual energy into the harmonized spirit great path below him. All the cultivators urged their spiritual energy. They injected it into the large formation below them. At the same time, the sky above the heavenly secrets pillar was filled with wind and clouds. The enormous spiritual energy of heaven and earth was drawn by an invisible force. It gathered towards the heavenly secrets pillar. The entire heavenly secrets pillar seemed to have become a black hole that swallowed everything. No matter how much spiritual energy was injected into it, it would be completely absorbed. Beside Lu Yi, and Lu Po were also working hard. They contributed their own strength. The pillar of heavenly secrets trembled incessantly as numerous complicated patterns appeared on its surface. It was as if something was about to break out of the pillar. This situation lasted for a long time. Something was indeed breaking out of the pillar. It was a pillar of light that shot into the sky. It pierced into the clouds. It continued. The pillar of light was so bright that even from 1,000,000 miles away, it could be seen clearly. After the heavenly secrets pillar lake emitted light, Lianjie's Qian was there. A pillar of light entered and exited the heavenly secrets pillar during the day. In an instant, heaven and earth shook. If one looked down from the starry sky. At this moment, Lianjie imitated hundreds of huge swords. The power of all the cultivators flowed out like water, forcing everyone to swallow yang spirit pills or spirit stones in their hands to recover as much as possible. Above the hundreds of light swords inserted in various parts of the main refinement world, dense ribbons of member power floated down. As time passed, the more the world shook, the brighter and brighter it became. All the living beings in the main refinement world. She couldn't help but have a feeling that everything was in Ho Chi's carriage. The carriage was slowing down rapidly. 9 provinces. In the past few months, people had been in a state of panic. This was because even mortals who had never cultivated had discovered some abnormalities in the starry sky. At first, the situation was not obvious. They only knew that a star in the night sky was getting brighter and brighter. However, as time passed, the true west eye of the star gradually revealed itself. To this day, even if it was broad daylight, as long as one looked up, they could see a large outline in the void from different directions. Moreover, this wheel was becoming clearer and larger. Some news inevitably spread. The mortals all knew that it was an existence similar to the 9 provinces. It was another realm from the starry sky. Now, this realm was approaching the 9 provinces. It probably wouldn't take long. It was about to collide head-on. Even the most ignorant mortals knew that this would cause some extinction disasters. Naturally, they would be terrified and uneasy. Even if the cultivators who stayed in the 9 provinces came out to comfort them, the situation wasn't any better. It could only be said that they didn't lose control. But how long could this situation last? No one could guarantee it. If it really reached the point where the people's hearts collapsed because of the pressure of despair, even if there was no collision between realms, it would probably be a disaster for the people of the 9 provinces. In fact, the cultivators of Thunderguard were also uncertain. Because they couldn't get in touch with the Nightmare Realm, they didn't know the progress of the teleportation. They were even more unclear. How could they make such a realm the size of a deer deviate from the orbit of the 9 provinces? They were all waiting anxiously. They tried their best to do their duty as cultivators and comfort the mortals who easily panicked. At every moment, all over the 9 provinces, there were people looking up. But every time they looked, it only brought deeper despair. Because compared to the last time they looked, the huge outline seemed to be bigger and clearer. This meant that the other party was closer to the 9 provinces. Even those cultivators of the spirit projection realm were affected. As a result, the situation of the entire battlefield became chaotic. Until this moment, waves of exclamations came from all over the 9 provinces. Because a pillar visible to the naked eye suddenly appeared on the huge outline, followed by a second, a third. Hundreds of pillars. No one knew what was going on. These pillars of light appeared so suddenly. Before, there was no complete light at all. But soon, the cultivators with profound cultivation bases noticed the camp that made them excited. The mortals and those cultivators with insufficient cultivation bases might not have noticed it yet. However, they could clearly tell that when the hundreds of light pillars appeared, they would not be able to escape. The speed of the blood-refining realm approaching the 9 provinces was rapidly slowing down. It seemed that there was an invisible force. It suppressed the advance of the blood-refining realm. Time passed. The speed of the blood-refining realm approaching the 9 provinces slowed down until it completely stopped. It would no longer approach the 9 provinces. The cultivators of the Divine Sea realm who saw this were all excited. Although they didn't know what had happened in the blood-refining realm, judging from the results, the expedition of the 9 provinces cultivators must have achieved unprecedented success. The current blood-refining realm had probably fallen into the control of the 9 provinces cultivators. Otherwise, such a situation would not have happened. The Tua immediately spread the news to the outside world. The news quickly reached the ears of the mortals. At this point, the atmosphere that had been uneasy for several months was swept away. For a time, the entire territory of the 9 divisions. The academic world celebrated. Everyone seemed to be in control of their lives. Please enter .com to view the latest update in your browser. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.